Wedding ultimatum. I stood up to my fiancé's parents who tried to control every detail of our big day, facing criticism, manipulation, and hidden ultimatums. I was buzzing with excitement that morning, my hands trembling as I carefully laid out my wedding dress on the bed. Today felt surreal. After months of planning, we were just days away from the ceremony. But even as I admired the delicate lace and the satin sheen, a tiny knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. I couldn't shake the thought of meeting Mark's parents for the first official pre-wedding breakfast. He'd warned me they were particular. I'd brushed it off, assuming any overbearing family quirks could be handled with charm. But as soon as I stepped into the sunlit dining room of their elegant suburban home, I felt the atmosphere shift. His mother, with her perfectly coiffed hair and a critical smile, gave me a slow, assessing look. His father's gaze lingered longer than comfortable, his lips pressed into a thin line. "So, you're the one who's taking our son," she said, voice polite but icy. I smiled, trying to project warmth, but every word I spoke seemed to land like a test. Comments about my outfit, my choice of shoes, and even my coffee preference were layered with subtle judgment. Are they really this nitpicky, or am I imagining it? I thought, my chest tightening. The more I tried to appear confident, the more I felt like a performer under a microscope. Mark, sitting beside me, squeezed my hand under the table. "They're a bit particular," he murmured, a nervous grin betraying his unease. I nodded, forcing myself to stay calm, while inside, a storm of emotions, excitement, fear, and the faint prick of self-doubt battled for dominance. I realized, even in this first encounter, that these next few days would be more than just wedding prep. They would be a trial, and I wasn't sure if I was ready. The first official task came just an hour after breakfast. Mark's mother, with that same icy smile, leaned back in her chair and said, "We'd like you to help us organize the seating chart for the rehearsal dinner. It's important everyone feels comfortable." Her tone sounded polite, but the sharp edge underneath was unmistakable. Mark shifted uncomfortably beside me, muttering, "It's nothing, just a little family thing." But I already felt the tension building. I opened my notebook, ready to jot down names and preferences, when his father chimed in, "Oh, and make sure you don't put any of the guests near the less desirable tables. We wouldn't want anyone uncomfortable, now would we?" His smile didn't reach his eyes, and I could feel the implied criticism hanging in the air. My chest tightened again. Every word they said felt like a hidden test, a subtle way to assert control. I tried to stay polite, asking questions and suggesting options. But each suggestion seemed to be met with tiny frowns or quiet murmurs of disapproval. As I worked through the seating chart, I started noticing patterns. They would compliment a suggestion I made and then immediately counter it with a subtle jab or an alternative, making me question every decision. "Oh, that table for the aunts? Are you sure? I think they'd prefer sitting with people closer to their age," his mother said, eyes narrowing just slightly. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. Inside, I felt like I was walking a tightrope over a pit of judgment. Mark tried to intervene gently, suggesting compromises, but his parents seemed determined to test me. It was more than just a seating arrangement. It felt like they were evaluating every aspect of who I was, probing for weaknesses. By the time I closed the notebook, my fingers were cramped and my mind spinning. The exhaustion wasn't just physical. It was emotional, as though I had run a marathon in someone else's world of invisible rules and subtle manipulations. Later, as I stepped away to get some fresh air, I caught my reflection in the window. I looked tired, tense, maybe even defeated. I reminded myself to breathe, to remember that I was here for my fiancé, that I was doing my best, and that their disapproval wasn't a reflection of my worth. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a very long, very difficult series of tests. By mid-afternoon, the first real test had arrived, and it hit harder than I could have anticipated. Mark's parents invited me into the kitchen under the pretense of helping with some wedding snacks for the rehearsal dinner. It sounded simple enough, but as soon as I stepped inside, the tension was palpable. His mother handed me a tray of hors d'oeuvres, her eyes scanning my every move. "Make sure the presentation is perfect," she said, voice sweet but sharp, like honey laced with vinegar. "We wouldn't want anyone to think our wedding is anything less than flawless." I tried to arrange the little pastries neatly, focusing on symmetry and color. But no matter what I did, it wasn't enough. She leaned over, tilting her head. Maybe you should have used the smaller platters. Don't you think it looks a bit crowded? I felt a jolt of frustration, my fingers pausing mid-placement. Was this really about the presentation, or was it just a subtle way to assert control, to see how much I could endure? His father appeared behind her, arms crossed. And make sure the labels are correct. Last time, someone, he glanced at me sharply, made a mistake, and it caused a bit of confusion. We wouldn't want that to happen again. His words were calm, almost measured, but I could feel the weight of the implied criticism pressing down. I nodded, forcing a smile, while inside my mind raced. Each action felt scrutinized, each word measured. And I realized this wasn't just about hors d'oeuvres. It was a test of my composure, patience, and willingness to bend to their expectations. I continued. Trying to balance perfection with speed, I caught myself clenching my jaw. My heart raced, my hands trembled slightly, and I had to take deep breaths to keep from snapping. The tension was suffocating, and I could feel my confidence slipping. Mark noticed and whispered, "Don't let them get to you." But even his reassurance couldn't erase the anxiety building inside me. Finally, when I thought I might collapse under the constant scrutiny, they stepped back, inspected my work, and gave a curt nod. "Well, acceptable," his mother said, the faintest trace of a smile on her lips. I exhaled, a mix of relief and lingering anger coursing through me. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that this was only the first of many challenges, and each one would chip away at my energy, patience, and resolve. That evening, I found myself alone in our small guest room, staring at the wedding plans spread across the bed. My fingers traced the lines of the invitations, the seating chart, and the color samples for the flowers, but my mind wasn't on the details. Instead, it was replaying every interaction with Mark's parents over and over. Every look, every subtly cutting remark, every little test felt like a weight pressing down on me. Am I overreacting? Am I too sensitive? Maybe they're just careful with their son, I told myself, though the pit in my stomach refused to ease. That I sank onto the bed, wrapping my arms around my knees. Thoughts tumbled through my mind like a relentless storm. What if I can't meet their expectations? What if this constant scrutiny becomes unbearable? Am I strong enough to survive the next few days? Each question chipped away at my confidence, leaving me raw and uncertain. I wanted to call Mark, to lean on him, but I didn't want to burden him with my doubts. Still, the isolation was overwhelming. That I reflected on the morning's tasks and the afternoon's kitchen ordeal. It wasn't just minor disapproval. It felt strategic, almost deliberate, like they were probing to see if I could withstand manipulation. My chest tightened, and anger mingled with fear. I thought about all the sacrifices I had made for this wedding, all the planning and coordination, and the constant mental gymnastics required just to keep the peace. Is it worth it? The thought made me bite my lip until it hurt. Finally, I took a deep breath and forced myself to sit upright. I had to remind myself why I was here, not to please them, but because I loved Mark and we were about to start our lives together. I needed to steel my nerves, to prepare for the challenges ahead, and to find some inner calm. I knew that in order to survive the coming days and to protect my dignity, I had to trust in my own strength. Even when every interaction felt like a minefield. By the time I finally laid down, exhaustion pulled at my limbs, but a spark of resolve had ignited. I wasn't powerless. I would face whatever tests they threw at me, one at a time, and I would do it on my own terms. The wedding wasn't just about tradition or appearances. It was about standing up for myself and for the life I was choosing with Mark. The next morning, the tension hit a new level. Mark's parents had invited me to help with some final touches for the rehearsal dinner decorations. I assumed it would be a simple task, arranging flowers, setting up candles. But as soon as I entered the living room, I realized this was another subtle test. His mother handed me a tray of delicate crystal candle holders, each one polished to perfection. "Be very careful," she said, eyes sharp. "We wouldn't want anything to be out of place. Our guests have very high standards." I started placing the candle holders meticulously along the table, trying to anticipate her unspoken expectations. Yet, each time I adjusted one, she would lean in and murmur something like, maybe a little closer together. Or no, a bit further apart, I think. Her corrections weren't direct criticisms. They were calculated nudges, each one eroding my confidence bit by bit. I felt trapped in a game I didn't know the rules to, where one wrong move might provoke disapproval. Just when I thought I might survive the scrutiny, Mark's father entered with a clipboard. And don't forget, the table seating has to reflect proper etiquette. Certain relatives should be closer to the hosts, others, not so much. His eyes lingered on me, a subtle challenge in their gaze. My heart pounded, my hands shook slightly, and I realized this wasn't just about decorations or seating. It was about control. They were testing my patience, my composure, and my ability to tolerate judgment without losing my cool. By mid-afternoon, my frustration had grown into a simmering anger. I had to remind myself constantly to stay polite, to nod and smile, to suppress the urge to snap. But deep inside, I felt a surge of defiance. I am not their puppet. I am here because I love Mark, not to pass some invisible test. Each time they tried to manipulate me, I repeated that mantra silently, a lifeline keeping me grounded. As the day ended, I retreated to the guest room, exhausted but quietly proud. I had navigated yet another round of their subtle tests without breaking, though I could feel the toll it had taken. My hands were sore from constant adjustments, my mind spinning from endless calculations, and my patience stretched to its limits. But I realized something vital. I was learning to hold my ground, to resist manipulation, and to assert my presence, even when faced with relentless scrutiny. The next morning, the tension between me and Mark's parents had started to affect him visibly. He seemed torn, caught between loyalty to his family and his love for me. During breakfast, he kept glancing at his parents nervously, as though anticipating their reactions to every word we spoke. I could see the strain in his jaw and the slight frown that didn't leave his face. It made my heart ache. I loved him, but I also realized that the wedding wasn't just about us anymore. It had become a battlefield of wills. That day, his mother introduced a new challenge under the guise of helping with wardrobe details. She pulled out a series of outfits for the rehearsal dinner, each with tiny, almost imperceptible criticisms. "I think this color might be a bit too bold," she said about one dress. "Perhaps something more conservative would be better for the family." Her gaze lingered on me, sharp and assessing, and I could feel her silently measuring my reactions. Every suggestion felt like a trap, every adjustment a potential failure in her eyes. Mark tried to defend my choices subtly, suggesting compromises and gently arguing. But his parents' passive-aggressive tactics were relentless. "We just want what's best," his father would say, a thin smile barely masking the condescension. I felt the emotional tug-of-war stretching me thin. On one side, my desire to maintain harmony. On the other, my growing frustration and need to assert myself. By evening, the strain became unbearable. Even casual remarks during dinner carried hidden criticisms. Laughter at small jokes felt pointed, whispers seemed directed at me, and the subtle glances reminded me that nothing I did could fully satisfy them. Mark reached over, squeezing my hand, his eyes apologetic. "I don't like seeing you like this," he murmured. I forced a weak smile, knowing he was caught between two worlds, his family's expectations and our future together. Alone later that night, I reflected on the growing tension. It wasn't just about clothing or etiquette, it was about control, manipulation, and testing boundaries. And I realized that if I wanted to survive this ordeal and keep my dignity intact, I would need to stand my ground more firmly, even if it meant clashing with the people who had shaped the man I loved. The stakes were higher than ever, and I knew that tomorrow would bring yet another challenge, one that might push me to my emotional limits. The next day, the tension escalated into outright humiliation. Mark's parents had invited a few extended family members over for what they called a pre-wedding social mixer. I walked in, heart pounding, dressed in what I thought was a tasteful outfit, ready to engage politely. But almost immediately, I felt the subtle knife of judgment slicing through the air. Whispers, smirks, and barely concealed glances followed me as I navigated the room. His mother, with an overly sweet smile, leaned toward a cousin and murmured loudly enough for me to hear, "Isn't it interesting how inexperienced some people can be?" My cheeks flushed, my stomach knotted, and I felt the eyes of everyone present weighing me, calculating, silently mocking. I tried to maintain my composure, engaging in small talk, laughing at jokes, but every compliment seemed forced. Every conversation edged with unspoken scrutiny. Then came the most blatant jab. His father, standing near the dessert table, casually remarked, "I hope the bride is comfortable in these family settings. Some of us tend to notice every little detail." The words were innocuous on the surface, but everyone knew what he meant. A cousin whispered, barely hiding a chuckle, and my humiliation crystallized into a sharp pang of anger and embarrassment. I could feel my face burning, my hands tightening into fists under the table. Mark noticed immediately. He shot his father a glare, muttered a quick apology on my behalf, but the damage was done. The subtle games had escalated to open ridicule, and I felt trapped, isolated, and exposed. Every attempt to appear calm felt like it emphasized their power over the room, their ability to manipulate perceptions and control the narrative. Later, when I finally retreated to the guest room, I sank onto the bed, exhausted and simmering with emotion. I was furious, humiliated, and shaken, but also strangely aware that this ordeal was revealing something crucial about myself, my limits, my resolve, and my capacity to endure. I realized that standing my ground, even in the face of public embarrassment, would be essential if I wanted to survive the remaining days and protect the relationship I cherished with Mark. That night, I sat alone on the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The day's events replayed in my mind like a never-ending loop of whispered judgments and thinly veiled ridicule. My cheeks still burned from the subtle humiliation at the family mixer, and I could feel the knot of frustration and anxiety tightening in my chest. How did it get this bad? I thought. I'm here to marry the man I love, not to survive a social interrogation that I tried to dissect each moment, each glance, each carefully chosen word from his parents. They weren't just critical, they were strategic. Every suggestion was a test, every offhand remark a probe. I realized with a sinking feeling that they were assessing me, measuring my patience, my composure, my willingness to bend. And yet, I also recognized a strange clarity. These trials were revealing my limits, my values, and the boundaries I needed to set. That I pulled out my journal, scribbling down my thoughts in a stream of raw honesty. I can't let them control me. I won't let them dictate my behavior or my self-worth. Mark is with me, and that matters more than anyone else's approval. Writing these words helped to anchor me, to remind me that despite their manipulation, I had a choice. I could respond with grace, with calm assertiveness, or I could let their games break me. Be why the time Mark peeked into the room to check on me, I felt a renewed sense of determination. He noticed the shift immediately. "You okay?" he asked gently, concern etched on his face. I nodded, meeting his gaze. "I have to be. I can't let them win." His relief was palpable, and he reached out to squeeze my hand. In that moment, I realized that the coming days weren't just about enduring. They were about asserting myself, protecting my dignity, and showing both my fiancé and his family that I wasn't someone to be manipulated. With that resolve in place, I prepared mentally for whatever challenge would come next, knowing that the true test wasn't just surviving the parental games. It was standing firm in my own truth, no matter how high the stakes. That night, I sat alone on the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The day's events replayed in my mind like a never-ending loop of whispered judgments and thinly veiled ridicule. My cheeks still burned from the subtle humiliation at the family mixer, and I could feel the knot of frustration and anxiety tightening in my chest. How did it get this bad? I thought. I'm here to marry the man I love, not to survive a social interrogation that I tried to dissect each moment, each glance, each carefully chosen word from his parents. They weren't just critical, they were strategic. Every suggestion was a test, every offhand remark a probe. I realized with a sinking feeling that they were assessing me, measuring my patience, my composure, my willingness to bend. And yet, I also recognized a strange clarity. These trials were revealing my limits, my values, and the boundaries I needed to set. That I pulled out my journal, scribbling down my thoughts in a stream of raw honesty. I can't let them control me. I won't let them dictate my behavior or my self-worth. Mark is with me, and that matters more than anyone else's approval. Writing these words helped to anchor me, to remind me that despite their manipulation, I had a choice. I could respond with grace, with calm assertiveness, or I could let their games break me. By the time Mark peeked into the room to check on me, I felt a renewed sense of determination. He noticed the shift immediately. "You okay?" he asked gently, concern etched on his face. I nodded, meeting his gaze. "I have to be. I can't let them win." His relief was palpable, and he reached out to squeeze my hand. In that moment, I realized that the coming days weren't just about enduring. They were about asserting myself, protecting my dignity, and showing both my fiancé and his family that I wasn't someone to be manipulated. With that resolve in place, I prepared mentally for whatever challenge would come next, knowing that the true test wasn't just surviving the parental games. It was standing firm in my own truth. No matter how high the stakes, the very next morning, Mark's parents escalated their tactics. What had been subtle manipulation and passive-aggressive comments now became a direct ultimatum. His mother summoned us into the formal sitting room, her posture rigid and her eyes sharp. "We need to discuss the wedding," she began, her tone carrying the weight of authority. "We cannot support this union unless certain conditions are met." My stomach sank. I could feel a rush of adrenaline and tension coursing through me. "What conditions?" I asked cautiously, trying to keep my voice steady. His father spoke next, leaning forward slightly. "Your behavior, your choices, the way you conduct yourself around our family. These need to align with what we consider appropriate. Otherwise," his words hung in the air like a threat. I could sense the gravity. They were willing to jeopardize the wedding entirely if I didn't conform. Mark looked torn, running a hand through his hair nervously. "Mom, Dad, this isn't fair," he interjected, though his voice was hesitant. His parents ignored him, continuing their pointed list of expectations. Every item felt like a test disguised as advice. What I wore, how I interacted with extended family, even the tone of my voice in conversation. Each demand was increasingly unreasonable, and I could feel the pressure mounting that I swallowed hard, fighting the mix of anger, fear, and frustration building inside me. This wasn't just about etiquette or appearances anymore. It was about control, power, and proving loyalty to a family I barely knew. I realized that their manipulations weren't going to stop. They were designed to push me to my breaking point. That I took a deep breath, summoning all the composure I could muster. "I love your son," I said slowly, meeting their eyes, "and I want to be part of this family. But I cannot compromise who I am, or constantly live under fear of judgment. If this wedding is going to happen, it has to be with mutual respect. I am not asking for permission. I am asking for understanding." There was a long, tense silence. Mark's parents exchanged subtle glances, their expressions unreadable. I could feel the weight of the ultimatum pressing down, but also a strange surge of pride within me. I had asserted myself, refused to be intimidated, and set a clear boundary. Whatever came next, I knew I wasn't going to be passive any longer. By late afternoon, the tension had reached a breaking point. Mark retreated with me to the small balcony outside, his hands gripping the railing as he struggled to find words. "I don't know what to do," he admitted, voice low and conflicted. "I love you, but my parents, they won't back down easily. They're used to getting their way, and I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "Mark, I love you, but this is your choice too. You have to decide if you're standing with me or letting them control everything. I can't keep compromising myself just to meet their standards." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing briefly before stopping to lean against me. "I know. I've been trying to navigate this without upsetting anyone, but I see now that staying neutral isn't an option. I can't keep letting them manipulate both of us." The honesty in his eyes made my chest ache. "It's not about winning," I said softly. "It's about respecting each other and protecting what we've built together. I need you with me, fully." After a long pause, Mark finally nodded. "You're right," he said, a hint of relief breaking through the tension. "I choose you. I can't let them dictate my life or our marriage. I'm done bending to their will. From now on, it's us." Hearing his words, I felt a wave of relief and empowerment. It was the turning point I had hoped for, the moment when the dynamic shifted. For the first time, I felt that we were united, standing together against the ongoing tests and manipulations. The coming challenges from his parents would still be difficult, but at least we were aligned, ready to face them as a team. That evening, I realized that this wasn't just about surviving family scrutiny. It was about the strength of our partnership, the importance of mutual support, and the courage to set boundaries. No matter how high the stakes, the day before the wedding, Mark's parents made one final attempt to assert control. They invited us to the family home under the guise of a casual dinner, but I could sense the tension the moment we walked in. Their smiles were tight, polite, but the underlying test was clear. I braced myself for whatever they might throw at me. His mother began with subtle critiques disguised as helpful suggestions. The flowers for tomorrow, perhaps a softer shade would be more appropriate, she said, her eyes scanning my face for reaction. I could feel the familiar knot of anxiety rising, but I stayed calm, replying with polite confidence. I appreciate your input, but the colors were chosen with Mark and I in mind. We'd like to keep them as planned. Then his father spoke, his tone measured but firm. We just want the wedding to reflect the family's values. Make sure nothing embarrasses anyone. The words carried weight, an unmistakable reminder of the power they thought they held. But this time, I didn't flinch. I met his gaze steadily. We understand. But this day is about our marriage, not fulfilling anyone's checklist. We'll do our best to honor the family while staying true to ourselves. Mark squeezed my hand under the table, and I felt a quiet surge of solidarity. For the first time, I realized that the dynamic had shifted entirely. We were no longer merely enduring. They could attempt to influence, but they could not control us. The tension remained, yes, but it had lost its dominance by the end of dinner. There was no dramatic confrontation, no explosive argument. Instead, there was a tentative acknowledgement, a begrudging recognition that we were standing firm. Mark and I left the house with a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and quiet triumph. We had faced tests, manipulation, and judgment, and we had survived. Together, as we prepared for the wedding day, I realized the true victory wasn't simply surviving his parents' games. It was maintaining our love, our integrity, and our partnership. The upcoming celebration would be the culmination, not only of our union, but of the resilience and strength we had shown against the pressures and ultimatums from the people who thought they could dictate our lives.